Something, something, something.
Ranged Cavalry Tactics Guide.
Something, something, something.
We start this guide with Javelin Cavalry using the Aserai Vanguard Ferris. Once again, we will go through each formation quickly and summarize the results at the end. It's probably no surprise to anyone, using line formation and holding ground against a ranged opponent is not a good idea. Our troops can throw javelins in a 180-degree arc, centered at our front, but the enemy can throw the whole time while circling. We end up with 0.35 KDR and 0% win rate. Now for the mirror matchup, line charge versus line charge. It's interesting as part of the line meet in the middle for melee combat while the rest of the formation continues to circle on the outside to throw javelins. The results were fairly close in terms of KDR for only 5 runs, but only 20% win rate. We would need to run many more tests to get the 1 KDR and 50% win rate. The results for line advance were a bit puzzling. Our line collapses on the enemy center and skips throwing the javelins. They take some nasty casualties at the start and don't perform well in melee combat. I'm not sure why they behave this way. The results are as bad as I've seen in all the testing up to this point. 0.13 KDR and 0% win rate. The summary here is easy. While in line formation, only consider giving a charge command for combat. Holding ground and advance are very bad. Shield wall looked promising using hold ground. They trade effectively for the initial charge, but then subsequent melee turns mostly red and results in a devastating defeat. At 0.29 KDR and 0% win rate, it's worse than line formation. The start of the shield wall charge was odd. Our line veered to the right, trying to get distance from the enemy. The initial javelin volley is effective and our shield wall holds the lead until the end. At 1.31 KDR and 89% win rate over several tests, we have our first successful counter to the AI line charge. I was curious to see how effective holding fire and shield wall was, so I repeated the test. Our side takes a huge hit from the enemy javelin volley, but once in melee combat, things even out a bit. The gap is too wide, however, and it's a convincing defeat. However, we can see from the data after running the test 7 times in total, we see a 1.21 KDR and 71% win rate. Shield wall is a great formation for cavalry once again. However, once we give the advance command, we see the familiar flood of red in the kill feed. They didn't seem to throw javelins while using advance. At 0.09 KDR, it should be avoided at all costs. Once again, the charge command performs the best, but in the case of shield wall, it counters line formation very effectively. Even holding fire performed well, although the initial javelin volley can help boost the KDR some, so I recommend leaving it on. Don't use hold ground or advance. Switching over to loose formation now, we actually see some promising results. The initial volley takes out nearly 10% of the enemy, but then slowly gives the lead back over time. There is a case to be made here for loose holding ground, then giving the charge command once the lines meet. At 0.62 KDR, it's much better than the other formations, but we still need some micro for this to be viable. For loose charge, we can see the same odd results where the lines bend away from the enemy charge and unleash a nasty volley, creating a wall of green. The enemy eventually returns the favor and it devolves into a bit of a slugfest. The results are still favorable though. At 1.36 KDR and 100% win rate, it's on par with shield wall charge. We see another sad showing for advance with a huge loss. The AI seems more concerned with keeping formation than hitting the enemy. At 0.36 KDR, it's only slightly better than the other formations. Looking at loose formation overall, it's surprisingly good. It performs as well as shield wall in the charge and better than the others at holding ground. Although charge is still the only option for fighting other javelin cavalry and winning. This was a nice surprise. Okay, time for the meme testing, starting with circle holding ground. Oddly enough, the initial charge did damage to the enemy, but then it quickly turns into a nightmare. At 0.29 KDR, it's similar to the other bad ones. In running the test for circle charge, I wasn't really sure how to describe it. Early on, it seems destined to fail hard, but then for reasons unknown, it quickly turns the tide and stomps the enemy. We can see from the data a 1.46 KDR and 100% win rate, which is slightly better than the other good formations. However, at this low of a sample size, it's hard to say it's better. So when recording the test for advance, it almost seemed like it was going to work. We get close to a win, but fall just shy. However, looking at the data, we see the subsequent tests showing the same abysmal performance. We shall chalk this one up to Tailworld's mathematics. Hopefully you're noticing a pattern in the results here, with charge being the only viable option against equal numbers of comparable enemy units. Don't use hold ground or advance. Switching to square, we see an early lead again from the initial contact that soon turns into a lopsided defeat, and it barely cracked 0.2 KDR. It's not a good option to use. Square charge follows a similar pattern of backing away from the enemy to throw some javelins and ends up in a tangled melee. The results were not as good as other formations, however, as we see a 1.09 KDR and 75% win rate. We can do better elsewhere. We won't waste time here. Square advance is bad and leads to defeat every time. Overall, Square performs worse than other formations in all tests and is not recommended for fighting with Javelin Cavalry. Moving on to Skein. Again, there's a huge volley from our troops that creates a gap of nearly 20 cavalry kills. That lead slowly erodes over time if left in hold position and ends up in a loss. The numbers are much better than other formations, however, at 0.73 KDR. In watching all of these tests, one pattern I noticed with Javelin Cavalry is that the kills come in huge streaks. It seems like one side will throw a volley, then the other side throws one back, and it goes back and forth. There may be a tactic with extra micro where we hold fire after the first volley and absorb the return javelins with the shield formation. We end up with a 1.11 KDR and 50% win rate, which seems to be on par with the mirror matchup. Again, we won't waste time with advance in Skein formation. It's bad and should be avoided for direct combat. The numbers aren't terrible here for Skein, but there are more efficient ways to use our Javelin Cavalry. Before we do the full recap, let's look at a final test for the max range and effectiveness at different distances. We are still using the Veteran Ferris, but use the Elite Manavlian for the other side. Around the 75 meter mark, our cav begin to throw their javelins. In order to test the effectiveness at this range, we allow each row to throw their javelin and move up slightly so the next row will be in range. After all javelins are tossed, we end up with 46 casualties inflicted from the max range. Next, we move up to 30 meters and let loose. After 5 volleys of javelins, the enemy formation flees, and we leave 101 carcasses on the field. Finally, we move on to just outside of aggro range and open up. It still takes the same 5 volleys to disperse the enemy, and casualties inflicted increase to 117. So it seems accuracy is increased slightly at this range, but it might not be worth the trouble as 30 meters is a reasonable distance to attack from. Now let's look at the full recap for Javelin Cavalry. One thing to note here is that sample sizes were relatively small since cavalry testing takes a lot longer to do. So from a statistics standpoint, 1.21 KDR is potentially the same as 1.46 KDR if we were to run enough tests. That being said, there are some clear winners and losers here. Charge command is literally the only command that provides consistent winning results. Hold and advance are not recommended to use in direct combat. When it comes to formations, it seems best to stay away from line, square, and Skein, as their results were closest to a break-even mirror match result. Personally, I like how compact shield wall and circle formation are, but any of the others will work just fine as well. Now for the part most of you have been waiting for, horse archer testing. I was really curious to see how they would do on hold ground since they can shoot through their own formation at the enemy. It turns out it doesn't work at all. It's a massacre. The shooting range for horse archers is about 270 degrees, so there's a built-in blind spot where they can take shots, but we cannot return them. We end up with a 0.34 KDR, which is quite bad. I also tested with face direction off, which produced even worse results at 0.21 KDR. Switching to line charge, we see a similar pattern as with the Javelin Cavalry, where some of the units get stuck in the middle in melee. I would have thought that their longer range would have prevented this, but I guess not. The mirror match goes as expected, neck to neck to the end. We only ran 5 tests, but at 1.03 KDR and 60% win rate, it's close enough to get the baseline. Time for everyone's favorite command, advance. At least they can shoot back at the enemy while they're falling back, right? Well, it turns out not really. It's a stomp. We barely managed a 0.14 KDR, so once again, I cannot recommend using advance for direct combat. There shouldn't be any surprises or epiphanies here. Line formation is break even using charge and loses bad elsewhere. Using face direction is better than letting units turn continuously, although it's a non-factor if we give the charge command. Moving on to shield wall, we see another slaughter in the making, although this time it's even worse as our horses are violently twitching back and forth, perhaps in protest to being put in this awful position. At 0.09 KDR, it's one of the worst we've seen. I thought maybe charge would work well, allowing a more concentrated volley of arrows from tighter formation, but it seems the tighter formation only makes them an easier target to shoot at. It's not a landslide loss, but it's not something we should be using at 0.61 KDR and 100% loss. I didn't think we would get much worse than 0.09 KDR from holding position, but we did. Advance brings this number all the way down to 0.06. It's quite clear that shield wall was not meant for horse archers. Shocking, I know. If shield wall performed poorly, then loose formation should in theory work better since it spreads out the units more. For this test, we allow the formation to rotate with the enemy and see much better results than the previous ones. It's still not a win, but an improvement nonetheless. We tried again with face direction on and get even better results, although it's still a loss. Without face direction, we can get 0.37 KDR, and with it turned on, up to 0.68. Not bad. Here we go. This should be our best shot for a winning formation against the AI. Loose charge certainly spreads our units out more, which helps reduce casualties somewhat. It's still a close battle until the end though. At 1.19 KDR, it's far from decisive, but our best option thus far. Even loose formation can't save advance from massive defeat. It seems our archers are too busy trying to run and have little to no time to shoot back. 0.13 KDR leaves a lot to be desired. Overall, loose formation is preferred over the other formations, as it provides a slight benefit. With a small sample size and slim margins, it's hard to say how much better it is though. I had high hopes for Circle since it performed so well with other units, although holding ground was quite bad. Units constantly shuffle from all over to fill the gaps, which causes inefficiency. It's certainly much better than other formations we've used, but it's still a big loss. Let's try a much tighter circle, which should allow more troops to return arrows per segment of circle. It seems this has the exact opposite effect, losing significantly faster and causing fewer casualties. With only 0.28 KDR, it's still not viable. I had a feeling the results of this test would turn out similarly to the shield wall. The results are interesting to say the least, with half of the test results resulting in a loss, but a KDR below 1.0. At 0.83, it's not too far off, and with the small sample size, it could very well be a mirror matchup. For the memes, we will look at a tiny clip of Advance in action. Wow, 0.05 KDR. I'm not sure it can get much worse than this. While I do want to acknowledge the limitations of having small sample sizes for these results, I think it's safe to say Circle is not a clear winner and should be avoided. I'm including square formation specifically for you to see that I was thorough and tested each of these, but as you can see, it's terrible for horse archers. Holding position produces 0.08 KDR, which is basically zero. Square formation charge seems to have an issue turning to keep up with the enemy, causing them to fall behind in the balance. It's a very convincing defeat at 0.52 KDR and 100% loss rate. Okay, you have to watch this one. It's extremely impressive how bad it is. Our units failed to down a single enemy here, making this the worst test out of all units in the game. Square is bad. Don't use square formation with cavalry archers. Moving on to the final test, Skein formation and holding ground. As expected, it's a bad loss. We managed only a 0.2 KDR this time. The next test is a little deceptive. We actually come out ahead in the end with a fairly convincing win with nearly half of our troops left. However, running the test 3 more times after we get back-to-back losses. Again, the sample size is small, but at 1.07 KDR, it seems Skein is on par with the line formation and is basically a mirror matchup. Spoiler alert, Skein Advance sucks. Before we do the full recap, let's check the max range and damage output at a few different distances. At around 210 to 215 meters, the front line begins to loose their arrows. Now let's back them up and try to dismount to see if there's a difference. It seems on foot their range is slightly longer, perhaps in the 1 to 5 meter range, but it's not a difference anyone would notice in a real fight. Now we reload and try firing at a distance of 180 meters, which is about the max distance for the last row of horse archers. After using all ammunition, we inflict 88 casualties, which is a lot better than I was expecting from that range. Next, we move up to about 100 meters and open up. By the 10th volley, 65 enemy troops lay dead. Only a few volleys later and the entire line has routed. We inflict 114 casualties in total. We repeat the test, but from 50 meters. This time, 89 troops are slain by the 10th volley, which is a big increase. Once again, the enemy line breaks shortly after with plenty of ammunition to spare. The kill count increases to 130 this time. And finally, we test just outside of melee aggro range, which is a little more than 20 meters. This time, the vast majority of the enemy line has routed by the 10th volley, and 100 troops are dispatched. At 127 kills, the final tally is comparable to the 50-meter test. Shooting at the enemy from max range is incredibly inefficient and should only be done in battles where the enemy is vastly outmatched. For all other battles, it's recommended to shoot from 50 to 100 meters for the best results. Now let's compare these static positions to the charge order where the AI circles around the enemy. Our horse archers ride up to the enemy line and begin to circle off at around the 50-meter mark, which is perfect because we have data from 50 meters while holding ground. Right away, it's obvious that the damage output is significantly less than shooting from a standstill. It's difficult to get an exact number of volleys being shot because it's so erratic, but time to kill seems to be between 2 and 3 times longer. Clearly, firing from a static position is vastly superior when it comes to damage output. The final recap will be the easiest one to remember. Charge is the only viable command to give, and line, loose, circle, and skein seem to be roughly the same, with loose having a slight edge, although further testing may be needed to say this definitively. If we have to use hold ground, then be sure to turn on face direction, as following the enemy can result in a loss of efficiency by roughly 50%. Everything else is terrible to use. I suspect that horse archers being able to shoot through their friends is causing these strange results, and if this ever is changed, then these results will no longer be valid. Okay, back to business as usual. We have a ton of bonuses to cover here. Starting with Horse Archer versus Horse Archer. In this test, we will place one side on hold fire and see which side is more effective. We take a full volley to the face, losing 7 troops right off the bat, but successfully close the distance with the enemy. However, the AI is quite good at separating, as we can see. Only a handful of the enemy units are engaged in melee, while the rest circle around the outside and pelt our troops with arrows. We actually hold the lead in kills for most of the battle, but once the unit count drops below 70, they start to take control. The enemy units are swarming everywhere, and it's difficult to pin them down in melee. The biggest weakness of the previous battle was the group that split off to circle around the outside. To combat this, we split off into 2 groups and trapped the outside units with the second charge. They seem to be struggling against our units, though, and eventually rout. We lose just over half of our troops, which means a KDR of around 1.5. For the final test in this section, we use the same 2 groups and see what happens if we have perfect timing. Both groups connect at the right moment and envelop the enemy. The kill feed looks promising, but then our units end up routing. I'm not sure what caused this exactly, but it seems like enough of the enemy got away from the melee to shoot arrows into our ranks. Using horse archers in melee against other horse archers can be effective, although it takes some micromanagement. Now time for the juicy stuff. Javelin Cavalry versus Horse Archers. We will be using both T5 units, the Aserai Veteran Ferris against the Imperial Bughalari. Both sides will stay in line formation and give the charge command. We can see the same circling off at the start of the battle, but the Javelin Cavalry quickly take control. I do think Javelins counter Horse Archers pretty well, but I don't think that's the full story here. The Aserai horses are blazing fast and can outcircle the enemy horses, which means our troops end up in their blind spot and cannot be shot at. We end up with 1.93 KDR in this test. Now we repeat the test, but place our Javelin Cavalry on hold fire and see if there is any improvement. There's no escaping the Aserai horses, and we quickly close the distance. However, as time goes on, the enemy gains some separation and the battle turns into a nail-biter. We come away with a win, but only just, at 1.28 KDR. One final test, let's take one of the best formations to use Javelin Cavalry, the shield wall. The initial charge takes 0 casualties, and our javelins hit their target. The archers do gain some ground back once the melee starts though, and the KDR is virtually identical from the previous tests. Line charge seems to counter horse archers the best. This next section was a bit of a bust. I had a whole series of ideas and tests that mostly didn't work out, so we will only look at the first part. We did something similar in the Javelin and Shock Troop guide, but I think it warrants another highlight since it's a great way to counter Aserai and Khuzait in a real battle. We take a small portion of our shield wall and place them in the front to draw the enemy horse archers in. The rest of our infantry are in the back and to the left side. As soon as the enemy commits to circling around our shield circle, we can give the loose formation command and charge in. It's not a pretty win, but it's a win nonetheless, and with cheaper units since our cost no horses. Here is a quick glimpse at the fiasco that didn't make the final cut. I tried to split our horse archers into 2 groups, with the inside group using melee to tie up the enemy and the second group on the outside raining down arrows. It doesn't work, like not even a little bit. Just keep them grouped up instead and take full advantage of the lack of friendly fire while using horse archers. The next section is meant to test the effectiveness of replacing all archers with horse archers, but using them as though they were foot archers. As always, the AI will do AI things and send their archers in front of their shield wall. This opens their infantry up to an easy flank since we can charge their line with our infantry and hold them in place while we rain arrows from the side and rear. It's an easy win with fairly light losses, all things considering. Next, we take the same army setups, but use our superior mobility to take the high ground before the enemy reaches our line. This will not only give us a range and damage boost, but it will also open up the enemy to a nasty flank attack as our infantry are still hidden on the left. As soon as we give the charge order from our legionary, both enemy lines swing to engage, which means our horse archers have free shots on the entire enemy flank. With the enemy right where we want them, there is no rush to charge in and can safely sit back and shoot arrows while our shield wall absorbs the enemy arrows. As we push the horse archers up, they react, so we give the infantry the charge order and catch their exposed flanks. Their infantry are still chasing our horse archers while their archers are getting chewed up by our legionary. It doesn't get much more decisive than this. Only a single horse archer lost. For the last section, we will test the effectiveness of using a mixed armory composition against OP horse archers. We will be using shield infantry, foot archers, melee cavalry, and horse archers in roughly equal numbers. As we saw before, having a shield circle or square can be quite effective at blunting the initial arrow storm from horse archers, so we begin with that up front. As the enemy circles off, we charge headfirst with our cavalry and pelt them with arrows from the foot archers. We also sneak our horse archers around to the rear to catch the enemy trying to create space from our charge. On paper, it all sounded really nice. However, in practice, it didn't quite work out. The biggest deficit here is allowing the enemy to loose sustained volleys of arrows, which devastate our ranks. We will try it again, but we'll get rid of the archers and horse archers, using only cavalry and a small shield wall up front. This time, we wait for the enemy to fully commit to the circle before we charge and catch them completely off guard. They put up a hell of a fight though, and it's a bit closer than I thought it would be. We still come out on top, although we only have half of our original numbers. And finally, we replace the melee cavalry with horse archers, but keep the shield circle up front. If we can soak up enough attention with our shield circle, our cavalry archers should have enough time to pick off the enemies as they circle around. After the first lap, our horse archer numbers are comparable to theirs, but our infantry have lost only a handful. I'm not sure what is happening after that though, as we get only 2 kills on the second lap, but lose our entire shield circle. We're left with comparable numbers of horse archers to theirs and have to issue a charge command to keep the pace. We do end up losing in the end though. Based on many of these tests, it seems the best way to counter horse archers without cheesing the edge of the map or using terrain is with javelins either on foot or mounted, with mounted javelins being the preference. If you hate fighting against horse archers as much as I do, then smash that like button and don't forget to use lots of Javelin Cavalry to counter them. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you on the next one.